Hi there, 4th and 5th graders. I'm back for a couple more chapters of The World According to Humphrey. So if you remember last time, he was with Miranda, and Miranda had that big dog Clem, and he had to like fling the rubber band at the dog, which is pretty amazing if you ask me. Okay, chapter 10, Garth versus AJ. If you have dogs or cats, you have to be very careful not to let them get near Humphrey. Miranda warned the rest of the class when we returned to room 26. You can say that again, I squeaked, but she didn't. I still considered Golden Miranda to be a special friend, and I had a very clean cage to show for my weekend, as well as a new respect for rubber bands. But I also decided that even though Miranda is practically a perfect person, I was not in a hurry to stay with her again. AJ raised his hand, and Mrs. Brisbane called on him. May I have Humphrey this weekend? We don't have a dog or a cat, he bellowed. Lower your voice, AJ. I'll let you know on Thursday. There may be other students who want Humphrey as well. At least half the hands in the classroom went up as kids started shouting, Me, me! I was quite flattered. But for some reason, the whole subject seemed to make Garth mad. Within minutes, he shot a rubber band at AJ. Ouch! AJ complained loudly. When he told the teacher what had happened, Garth denied it. Humphrey did it, he said. Gail giggled. Mrs. Brisbane did not. I don't believe a hamster can shoot a rubber band, she said sternly. A lot she knows. The next day, Garth stuck his foot out and tripped Art as he went to sharpen his pencil. I didn't do it. He's just clumsy, Garth protested. Mrs. Brisbane angrily scolded him. That same day, Garth pushed Gail at morning recess. He spent afternoon recess inside. Garth Tugwell, you're halfway to Principal Morales' office right now. Mrs. Brisbane sounded really angry. Garth just shrugged his shoulders. On Wednesday, Garth sneaked back into the room while Mrs. Brisbane went to the office during recess, and he headed straight for my cage. The two of us were all alone in the room. Hello, Rat. Why don't you just run away? Then nobody will take you home on the weekend, he said. He opened my cage door and grabbed me. You'd like your freedom, wouldn't you? Rat. He set me on the floor. My heart was pounding. Thump, thump, thump. Go on, Rat. Skedaddle. He gave me a little push with his hand. I scampered under the table. I wanted to say something, but for the first time ever, I was scared squeakless. Have fun, he said, and in an instant he was gone. I was pretty confused. For one thing, I didn't want to run away. I was perfectly happy staying in room 26 and having adventures on the weekend. Where would I go? What would I do? There was no time to waste. I scampered over to the cord that hung down from the blinds and grabbed onto it. Then I started the old swinging routine, back and forth, swinging a little higher each time until I reached the tabletop. Back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, leap. There wasn't time to think about my queasy stomach as I raced into my cage, slamming the door shut behind me. Just then, Mrs. Brisbane returned. I darted into my sleeping house so she wouldn't see how hard I was breathing. I saw her look at the window, puzzled. She walked over to it and stared at the blind cord, which was still swinging. She reached out and stopped it with her hand. Then she shook her head and walked away. When recess was over and my classmates filed back into the class, Garth looked over at my cage, half smiling. But that smile quickly disappeared when he saw that the door was closed. He leaped out of his seat and looked at my cage. Howdy, I squeaked at him. Garth, please get back to your seat, Mrs. Brisbane told him. But Humphrey, he protested. Well, what is it? Mrs. Brisbane was getting irritated. He's in his cage, he said. A few of my classmates giggled, but not Mrs. Brisbane. In case you haven't noticed, he's always in his cage, Garth, she said. Now get back in your seat. Garth did what he said, but for the rest of the day I noticed him staring over at me. On Thursday, Mrs. Brisbane announced that I would be spending the weekend at AJ's house. Yes, AJ shouted, delighted at the news. A few seconds later, a whole series of rubber bands hit AJ on the neck, shoulder, and head. Cool it, Garth, AJ yelled, jumping out of his chair. Man, I'm tired of these rubber bands. Garth acted innocent. I don't know where they came from. They could have come from anywhere. Garth did it, Heidi said. I saw him. Mrs. Brisbane didn't remind Heidi to raise her hand, but she did tell Garth to stay in during recess. Not fair, Garth muttered under his breath. When the doorbell rang for recess, Garth stayed in his seat. Mrs. Brisbane closed the door when all the other students had left and walked to his desk. Normally, I would have been napping at the time, but I was wide awake and wondering what that boy had to say. Garth, You've been acting strangely lately. You never got into trouble at all until 2 weeks ago. Now you're shooting rubber bands at people and disturbing the entire class. Can you tell me why?" Garth slowly shook his head. "No. Your grades are slipping too. Has something changed in your life?" Garth slowly shook his head again. "How about at home? Is anything wrong?" Garth didn't shake his head. He didn't move a muscle. "Should I talk to your parents about your behavior, Garth?" Garth's face got very red. "No," he said with a choking sound. Mrs. Brisbane moved closer and put her hand on Garth's shoulder. "Tell me what's wrong." "My mom's sick," he said. "Real sick." Tears ran down his cheeks. I was feeling a little teary-eyed myself. "How sick?" Mrs. Brisbane asked. "She lost all this weight and she was in and out of the hospital and now she's just tired all the time." And Garth didn't try to finish his sentence. Garth wiped away the tears with the tissue Mrs. Brisbane handed him. "That's why I can't take Humphrey home. My dad says we can't let anything bother Mom. Well, my little brother bothers her and we let him in the house." Mrs. Brisbane smiled slightly. "Humphrey is a big responsibility, Garth. That's why I don't take him home. My husband's been sick too. Did you know that?" Garth shook his head. "No. So I know what it's like. Listen, I'll make a few calls tonight. Maybe we can find a way for you to spend some time with Humphrey," she said. "But he hates me," I squeaked. "I'd like to," said Garth. "Huh?" I was confused. "But you have to promise me that you won't disrupt the class anymore," Mrs. Brisbane told him. "Is that a deal?" Garth nodded. "Deal. As you know, I'm very good at coming up with plans to solve human problems. Very, very good. But try as I might, I couldn't imagine what Mrs. Brisbane's plan to get Garth to spend some time with me could be. I was still trying to figure it out when Aldo arrived that night. "Humphrey, my man," he yelled when he opened the door. I almost fell off my wheel. "You are the most handsome, intelligent hamster in the world, and I am the luckiest man in the world because I am dating the most beautiful woman in the world." Aldo swept his way toward my cage, then lowered his voice. But don't tell anybody I said so. Not yet. After all, Marie and I have only been out 3 times, but oh, what times we've had." He pulled up a chair and sat very close to me. "And it's all thanks to the Moonlighters Club and that clipping over there." He pointed toward the spot where the overhead projector had once stood. "And you, I know you had something to do with it. I just can't figure out what. Anyway, don't tell anybody, but someday I'm going to marry Maria. And when I do, I want you to be the best man. Or best hamster, I guess. I really mean it. If you were a guy, I'd buy you a burger." He reached in his pocket and pulled out a little piece of foil. "Instead, I got you this." He unwrapped a piece of carrot and put it in my cage. "Thank you, Aldo," I squeaked. "I wish you lots of happiness." "I knew you'd be happy for me, Humphrey." Aldo smiled and then jumped up. "Woohoo! I've got so much energy I can clean this room in half the time. I could climb a mountain and not even get tired. I could conquer the world." He leaned forward and grinned through his glorious mustache. "Ain't love grand?" "If you say so," I replied. I'd never seen anyone so happy before. The only thing that would make me that happy would be if Miss Mac came back. He's not coming back. And I'm still stuck with Mrs. Brisbane, and she's stuck with me. Say, what did she mean when she said she doesn't take me home because her husband's sick? Did she mean she would take me home if her husband wasn't sick? I thought about it all night and came up with an answer. No, no, no. She doesn't take me home because she doesn't like me. Maybe I'm lucky after all. Tip 10. Hamsters are incredible acrobats and climbers. They seem to defy the laws of gravity. Okay, so like notes for this chapter would definitely be Garth, the new character, right? He is having some trouble. His mom is sick. He acts out in class, shoots rubber bands, tried to let Humphrey go, not cool. And then Aldo, super happy about this Maria lady. So those would be my main notes for this chapter. Okay, now we're on to chapter 11, TV or not TV. Wow, Friday was a great adventure because AJ took me on the school bus. It was noisy and smelly and very, very bumpy. And just about everyone on the bus wanted to get a good look at me, including the driver, Miss Victoria. It was exciting, almost too exciting, because AJ couldn't hold my cage steady, and I was slipping and sliding and bouncing until I was quite dizzy. "Sorry, Humphrey, I'm trying to hold still," AJ told me, as someone bumped his elbow and sent me sprawling on the floor of my cage. "It's all right," I squeaked weakly. The bus let us off close to AJ's house. It was a 2-story old house with a big porch. As soon as I entered, I got a warm welcome from AJ's mom, his younger brother Ty, his little sister Deely, and his baby brother Bo. "Anthony James, introduce us to your little friend," his mom said, greeting us. Anthony, James, everybody at school called AJ by his initials or just Age. This is Humphrey, he answered. Hello, Humphrey, said Mrs. Thomas. So how was your day, Anthony? Lousy. Garth kept shooting rubber bands at me. He won't leave me alone. But you two used to be friends, his mother said. Used to be, said AJ, until he turned into a jerk. Mom patted her son on the shoulder. Well, we've got the whole weekend to get over it. Now take Humphrey into the den and get him settled down. Mrs. Brisbane called him Lower Your Voice, AJ, because AJ always talked extra loud in class. I soon noticed that everybody at AJ's house talked extra loud. They had to, because in the background the TV was always blaring. Now, every house I've been in so far had a TV. Even Ms. Mack had a TV, and I enjoyed some of the shows I'd seen with her. There's one channel that has nothing but the most frightening shows about wild animals attacking one another. I mean wild. Like tigers and bears and hippopotamuses. Gee, I hope that's not on our vocabulary test in the near future. Those shows make me appreciate the protection of a nice cage, as long as the lock doesn't quite lock. There's another channel that only has people in funny-looking clothes dancing and singing in very strange places. It makes me glad that I have a fur coat and don't have to figure out what to wear every day. Mostly, I like the cartoon shows. Sometimes they have mice and rabbits and other interesting rodents, although I've never seen a hamster show yet. Anyway, the difference at the Thomas's house is that the television is on all the time. There's a TV on the table across from a big comfy couch and a big comfy chair, and someone's almost always sitting there watching. I know because they put my cage down on the floor next to the couch. I had a very good view of the TV. I couldn't always hear the TV though because AJ's mother had a radio in the kitchen which was blaring most of the time while she cooked or did crossword puzzles or talked on the phone. No matter what she did, the radio was always on. When AJ's dad came home from work, he plopped down on the couch and watched TV while he played with the baby. Then AJ and Ty plugged in some video games and played while Dad watched. Deely listened to the radio with her mom and danced around the kitchen. When it was time for dinner, the whole family took plates and sat in the den so they could watch TV while they ate. Then they watched TV some more. They made popcorn and kept watching. Finally, the kids went to bed. The baby first, then Deely, and later Ty and AJ. After they were all in their rooms, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas kept watching TV and ate some ice cream. Later, Mrs. Thomas yawned loudly. I've had it, Charlie. I'm going to bed and I suggest you do too, she said. But Mr. Thomas just kept on watching, or at least he kept on sitting there until he fell asleep on the couch. I ended up watching the rest of the wrestling match without him. Unfortunately, the wrestler I was rooting for, Thor of Glore, lost. Finally, Mr. Thomas woke up, yawned, flicked off the TV, and went upstairs to bed. Peace at last. But the quiet only lasted about 10 minutes. Soon Mom brought Bo downstairs and gave him a bottle while she watched TV. When Bo finally fell asleep, Mrs. Thomas yawned and flicked off the TV. Blessed relief. 5 minutes later, Mr. Thomas returned. Sorry, hamster, can't sleep, he mumbled to me as he flicked on the remote. He watched and then dozed off again. But the TV stayed on, leaving me no choice but to watch a string of commercials for car waxes, weight-reducing programs, exercise machines, and red-hot harmonica classics. The combination of being nocturnal and being bombarded with sight and sound kept me wide awake. At the crack of dawn, Deely tiptoed into the room, dragging her doll by its hair, and switched to a cartoon show about princesses. She watched another show about cats and dogs. Scary. Then Mr. Thomas woke up and wanted to check some sports scores. Mrs. Thomas handed him the baby in the bottle, and soon the older boys switched over to video games, and their parents watched them play. It was loud, loud, loud. But the Thomases didn't seem to notice. What do you want for breakfast? Mom shouted. What? Dad shouted louder. What do you want for breakfast? Mom yelled. Toaster waffles, Dad yelled louder. I can't hear the TV, Ty hollered, turning up the volume. Do you want juice? Mom screamed. Can't hear you, Dad responded. And so it went. With each new question, the sound on the TV would be turned up higher and higher until it was positively deafening. Then Mom switched on her radio. The Thomases were a perfectly nice family, but I could tell it was going to be a very long and noisy weekend, unless I came up with a plan. So I spun on my wheel for a while to help me think, and I thought and thought and thought some more. And then it came to me, the big idea. I probably would have come up with it sooner, for I could have heard myself think. Around noon, the Thomases were all watching the football game on TV. Or rather, Mr. Thomas was watching the football game on TV, while AJ and Ty shouted questions at him. Mrs. Thomas was in the kitchen listening to the radio and talking on the phone. Dealey played peekaboo with the baby in the cozy chair. No one was watching me, so I carefully opened the lock that doesn't lock on my cage and made a quick exit. Naturally, nobody could hear me skittering across the floor as I made my way around the outside of the room over to the space behind the TV cabinet. Then, with great effort, I managed to pull out the plug, one of the most difficult feats of my life. The TV went silent, beautifully, blissfully silent, silently silent, so silent I was afraid to move. I waited behind the cabinet, frozen. The Thomases stared at the TV screen as if the picture slowly went dark. "Ty, did you hit that remote?" Mr. Thomas asked. "Nah, it's under the table." "Anthony, go turn that thing on again," Mr. Thomas said, and AJ jumped up and hit the power button on the TV. Nothing happened. "It's broken," he exclaimed. Mrs. Thomas rushed in from the kitchen. "What's happened?" Mr. Thomas explained that the TV had gone off, and they discussed how old it was, 5 years, whether it had a guarantee, no one knew, and if Mr. Thomas could fix it. He couldn't. Everything was fine, and it went off just like that. "I guess we'd better take it in to get fixed," Mr. Thomas said. "How long will it take?" Dealey asked in a whiny voice. "I don't know," her dad replied. "How much will it cost?" Mrs. Thomas asked. "Oh, yeah," her husband said. "I forgot. We're a little low on funds right now." The baby began to cry. I thought the rest of the family might start crying too. "Well, I get paid next Friday," Dad said. AJ jumped up and waved his hand. "That's a whole week away." "I'm going to Grandma's house. Her TV works," said Ty. "Me too," Dealey chimed in. "Grandma's got her bridge club over there tonight," Mom said. "I know," said Dad. "Let's go to a movie." "Do you know how much it costs to go to a movie?" Mom asked. "Besides, we can't take the baby." "Oh." They whined and bickered for quite a while. They got so loud I managed to scamper back to my cage unnoticed. Then I guess I dozed off. Remember, I'd hardly had a wink of sleep since I'd arrived. The bickering was nice, soothing background after all that racket. I was only half asleep when the squabbling changed. "But there's nothing to do," Dealey whined. Her father chuckled. "Nothing to do, girl. My brothers and I used to spend weekends at my grandma's house, and she never had a TV. Wouldn't allow it." "What did you do?" AJ asked. "Oh, we were busy every minute," he recalled. "We played cards and board games and word games, and we dug in her garden and played tag." He chuckled again. "A lot of times we just sat on the porch and talked. My grandma, she could talk." "What did you talk about?" Ty wondered. "Oh, she'd tell us stories about her growing up, about ghosts and funny things, like the time her uncle was walking in his sleep and went to church in his pajamas." Mrs. Thomas gasped. "Oh, go on now, Charlie." "I'm just telling you what she told us. He woke up in the middle of the service, looked down, and there he was, in his blue and white striped pajamas." I let out a squeak of surprise, and all the kids giggled. Then Mrs. Thomas told a story about a girl in her class who came to school in her slippers by accident one day. "Yes, the fuzzy kind," she explained with a big smile. They talked, and Dad got out some cards, and they played a game called Crazy Eights and another one called Pig, where they put their fingers on their noses and laughed like hyenas. When Bo fussed, they took turns jiggling him on their knees. After a while, Mrs. Thomas gasped, "Goodness sakes, it's an hour past her bedtime." The children all groaned and asked if they could play cards tomorrow, and in a few minutes, all the Thomases had gone to bed, and it was quiet, 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 for the first time since I'd arrived. Tip 11, be careful. If set free, hamsters are experts at disappearing in a room. Okay, so probably some notes about the Thomas households, right? And all the kids. You could name some of all the characters. And then clearly the TV, right? Blaring, blaring, blaring TV. And then what do you do when there's no TV, right? Play games, talk. That's pretty awesome in my book. All right, take it easy.